Insider's case. With the comedy over, tragedy continues. When will spring come? Ideological discourse between experts and speakers at the Eurasian Media Forum. Thunderstorm of Cold War echo. Drivers of faith. Reactions to innocence of Muslims in Bishkek. Waves of spontaneous disturbances and conspiring rumors. Unraised virgin lands. Ministry of Culture bans paintings from modern art exhibition in Astana. Hello, you're watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel. I'm Asylbek Abdulov. President Nazarbayev was once again snubbed for the Nobel Peace Prize. This was his sixth attempt since 2006. The bitterness of defeat is brightened by the fact that he didn't lose to just anyone, but to the entire European Union, for its work in the unification of Europe and its transformation from a continent of war to a continent of peace. As someone put it ironically on the web, one bureaucracy awards another. If Nobel saw this, he would stay in the arms business. Russian rights activist Lev Ponomarev condemns the award. Ponomarev says the Nobel Peace Prize should be given to people, those who risk their lives, their health, their families. I think it is wrong to give such rewards to large organizations who unite states. He believes the award should have been handed to Pakistani Malala Yousafzai or Kazakh politician Vladimir Kozlov, but not to the EU. 14-year-old BBC blogger Malala Yousafzai and her classmates were wounded by Taliban soldiers who seized their school bus. The girl is in a coma and doctors evaluate her conditions as serious. She became famous and hated by the Taliban because of her blog posts covering the events in the Swat Valley, which was under Taliban's control since 2009. They destroyed hundreds of schools and banned female education. Meanwhile, another Ponomarev's nominee, Kazakh opposition politician Vladimir Kozlov, was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison this week.
Upon entering the courtroom, Kozlov, Saparkhali, and Aminov were greeted with applause. Judge Murzabekov repeated the prosecutor's indictment almost verbatim and announced the suspect's guilt as proven beyond doubt. Due to their contrition, Aminov and Saparkhali received 5 and 3-year suspended sentences, respectively. Kozlov was found guilty on 3 criminal counts: the incitement of social hatred, calling for the overthrow of constitutional order, and establishing and leading an organized criminal group. The court sentenced him to 7.5 years in prison with confiscation of property. It is all right. This is not a trial. The trial is ahead. It was a frame-up trial, and it is a crime. Despite the suspended sentence given to Akshanat Aminov, the judge declared him leader of a criminal group established to take revenge against his employers. Nevertheless, Aminov was found guilty only of calling for the overthrow of constitutional order. After his release in the courtroom, Aminov immediately left the scene in his car, while Sedik Saparkhali stopped to give a brief interview to the press. Kozlov is innocent. This is absolute nonsense and a product of someone's wild imagination. I have never thought that NSC works on such a low level. It is just a disgrace. I did partially admit responsibility. They found me guilty for what I said in 2010, although I just said it to be released to help these people. Aliya Turuzbekova, the spouse of Vladimir Kozlov, was allowed to visit her husband after the trial. The visit lasted only 10 minutes, and the only thing Kozlov asked to pass the people outside were the words of gratitude to his supporters. Of course, it is horrible to be imprisoned, especially when one feels that everything was done right, when white is labeled black, and when it's simply impossible to prove innocence under given circumstances. I told him that everyone supports him, including international organizations, when he is out there in isolation all alone. Of course, such care as support of friends and family means a lot. There is also little hope that appeals court will acquit him, but we must go through this. We must try it. Political scientist Viktor Kovtunovsky believes that the verdict clearly shows the shortcomings of Kazakhstan's government system. It relies too heavily on force and therefore is subject to serious risks if the authorities fail the public trust or the national leader leaves politics. However, it seems that officials are not concerned about the matter at all. It seems to me that we should not expect any improvement, since Nazarbayev believes that this trial brought results. He probably believes that the Aktau trial was his personal achievement, since almost all participants participants of this trial repented and admitted their guilt, except for Kozlov. President Nazarbayev called the trial a success 3 days prior to the official verdict announcement. The head of state gave an interview to Russian Channel 1 on the eve of his Moscow trip. It looked like he did not expect any questions related to Zhanaozian. Nevertheless, some editing made his response look quite convincing. They were criminals. The puppeteers stood aside and controlled the situation, but all of them are arrested and are tried. Right now it is peaceful in Zhanaozian and people are working. I cannot really comment on the trial before it ends.
Люди работают.
On the day the verdict was announced, Kazakhstan's state-run television channels launched an information campaign against Alga Party, pending registration, and Vladimir Kozlov. During prime time, 2 films titled Immoral Algorithm and Alga Menaksha were broadcast on TV channels Khabar, Kazakhstan, and STV. In these films, Vladimir Kozlov was accused of polygamy in multi-million fraud case, and he was even compared to the goat provocateur who led the sheep to slaughter.
Такие ресурсы брошены на развенчание, дискредитацию.
So many resources were directed at debunking and discrediting him. We look ridiculous to the whole world. It is a silly attempt since the whole world knows the history well, and thank God everyone is aware of what we have gone through. I think that any self-respecting politician and political scientist has read Orwell's 1984, and what we see is nothing more than 5 or 10 minutes of hatred. The 2-episode hatred film caused outrage in Gaziz Aldamjanov, the associate of Vladimir Kozlov, in the public front. According to him, the fuss on the state channels is nothing more than government's attempt to justify itself to the public and hide the real motives behind the verdict. The authorities are treating all alike and are prosecuting Kozlov in place of Ablyazov, which means it is an act of vengeance. In other words, if it is impossible to put you behind bars, then it is your man who will be sentenced. The government wants to prove to the people that he is condemned by law, although everyone is well aware, along with the authorities themselves, that Kozlov was prosecuted for nothing. In the past week, the representatives of international organizations for human rights, Human Rights Watch and Freedom House, have released their statements addressed to the government. Ricardo Migliori, chairman of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, also expressed his distrust in the Kazakhstan judicial system. Meanwhile, Markus Leuning, the German federal government commissioner for human rights, directly urged the president Nursultan Nazarbayev to pardon the convicted politician Vladimir Kozlov. The verdict also had a negative impact on Kazakh-US relations. The United States deeply values our strategic partnership with the Republic of Kazakhstan and its stated commitments to greater openness and democracy. The United States was disappointed to hear of the conviction of Vladimir Kozlov, leader of the opposition party Alga, and is concerned about the apparent use of the judicial system to silence a leading opposition voice in Kazakhstan. Astana's official reply was prompt. The MFA reply was followed by the General Prosecutor's Office statement, which stated that no political motives were behind the verdict in Vladimir Kozlov's case, and the trial was conducted openly and fairly. It is not right to claim that the verdict in Kozlov's case was politically motivated. In this case, it was a will and even the state's duty to examine all the circumstances of the Zhanaozian riots. Meanwhile, the former chairman of board management of Samruk Kazana Fund, as well as the son-in-law of the president, Timur Kolyvayev, absolutely refused to comment on the Zhanaozian trials, which actually cost him his office. You are well familiar with the case. I have nothing to comment on. We do accept the verdict issued by the court. Maxim Kaznachev, a political scientist, believes that extreme measures are dictated by the desperate situation of the head of the state. In his opinion, both Zhanaozian trials and reshuffling in high ranks of government is a necessary manifestation of a higher political will. The head of state is concerned with the repetition of Zhanaozian events, and he is forced to prove to both opposition and his close circle that he is still able to hold power. This is a signal that indicates formal limits of the permitted rules to the game. In other words, it is allowed to criticize the president in the media, but it is not allowed to resort to force in an attempt to put pressure on his power. Here, the role of Vladimir Kozlov is nominal. A much more important thing here is the message of the president to the elite groups holding senior offices. It is clear that the actions of the Alga Party and Vladimir Kozlov were, as it turned out, guided from abroad. But it is possible that guidances from abroad were also masterminded in the senior offices in Astana. From this perspective, it is the most important message from the president to his closest associates in Astana. It is unclear how the presidential administration received this signal, but in the opposition camp the signal was clearly understood, and Vladimir Kozlov's colleagues, even if they do not admit their powerlessness, they are at least inclined to believe that the time will show. Time will pass, and Vladimir Kozlov will be rehabilitated. He will be one of the outstanding men who fought against the regime. Right now, for the government, it is very important to achieve the result, to avoid the public blaming government, presidential administration, the president, and others for what happened. No, Kozlov and Ablazov are the ones to blame. I absolutely do not see the legal framework for the operation of political parties, because in this case, any political party could be accused of inciting social discord, calling for forcible overthrow of the constitutional order. This is so sad that I cannot comment on this matter. It is a substantial rollback from democratic principles. Maxim Kaznachev believes the political field in Kazakhstan is awaiting transformation after the imprisonment of one of the leaders of the radical opposition. In his opinion, after the Zhanozyan tragedy, the opposition has not been able to escape the ideological crisis by no means. According to Kaznachev, this situation gives to the authorities an advantage, which probably will keep trying to reshape the political field in accordance with its interest. Right now, the authorities received an advantage in time when they can pursue a preemptive tactic. It will try to lock the attention of unoccupied opposition supporters, protest-driven social strata, on new party members. It is possible that second-tier non-parliamentary parties will be involved. There is also an issue with upcoming elections. The country has no moderate opposition parties de facto, supported by a very substantial part of society, 15 to 20% of the electorate. Right now, the authorities received an advantage in time when they can pursue a preemptive tactic. It will try to lock the attention of unoccupied opposition supporters, protest-driven social strata, on new party members. It is possible that second-tier non-parliamentary parties will be involved. There is also an issue with upcoming elections. The country has no moderate opposition parties de facto, supported by a very substantial part of society, 15 to 20% of the electorate.
Commenting on the verdict, the patriarch of the Kazakh opposition, Serik Balsyn Abdildin, said, "This is worse than the decade-old trial over Ablazov and Zhakyanov, but better than murders of Altanbek Sarsinbayev and Zamanbek Nurkadilov 5 years ago. These comparisons captured all the key and dramatic events in the life of the Kazakh opposition over the last 10 years, starting with the democratic choice of Kazakhstan, condemning its leaders, continuing with political killings, and topped off by the trial over Vladimir Kozlov. Almost as if the first gate of hell has been reached and the others are on the horizon, how will the fate of the opposition and other dissidents pan out is unknown. Forecasts are disappointing. Early indicators of some repressions can be found in the condemning part of the Judge Murzabekov verdict in Kozlov's case. The information policy of the following media, Channel KpLus, Stan KZ, Respublika website, as well as Golos Respubliki and Vzгляд newspapers, was directly towards undermining, destroying social, political and constitutional order of the Republic of Kazakhstan. To wit, independent and pro-government media's coverage of oil workers' strikes, the massacre in Zhanozyan, investigations and trials is a topic that needs to be put on the table for discussion, for instance at the 10th Eurasian Media Forum. However, the word Zhanozyan doesn't even figure in the forum's program. Local organizers are traditionally far from issues close at hand. Coincidentally, the Kazakh press Zhanozyan syndrome fit nicely into one of the media forum's topics: double standards in the media, bias and prejudice, provocation and misinformation, differences between mass media in the East and West. Nursultan Nazarbayev didn't attend the 10th anniversary Eurasia Media Forum, which was organized by his daughter Dariga in Astana. A few people from the official guest lists, including Mikhail Gorbachev, Julian Assange, Rosa Tumbaeva and Nino Burjanadze, didn't make it either, while those who attended the forum were greeted by the welcome speech by the new Prime Minister Serik Akhmetov. A new era of global accessibility and transparency of information increases the requirement for media and its moral responsibility before society. Indeed, the journalists have personally experienced the increased requirements. The organizers have introduced quotas of one journalist per edition. Journalists were able to observe the debate only through the monitor, which prevented any random questions. The Iranian diplomat has set a tone for the discussion of the first topic of Arab Spring, asking why all the terrorists in Western media are Muslims. We are witnessing how sacred words such as democracy, human rights and fight against terrorism turn into nonsense and double standards of superpowers, which transform these issues into instruments for achieving selfish goals. A group of Russian experts actively supported the Iranian diplomat. In their opinion, the protests in North Africa and the Middle East began almost simultaneously by the same scenario and were organized by the US. I'm sorry, but the immutable notion of sovereignty is trampled upon with every opportunity by your fellow US citizens. Why should someone decide anything for anyone? It is ultimately hypocritical to talk about terrorism when you have weapons of mass destruction and daily kill women and children in Iraq and Afghanistan, when the poor cannot afford to respond to the gigantic war machine of the world order, throwing 1,000-pound bombs on the Gaza Strip.
Военного превосходства мирового порядка, бросающего тысячефунтовые бомбы на полосу Газы.
Once the discussion at the media forum reached to the point when the delegates started bringing up how Americans used to lynch black people, US delegates lost their temper.
Gaydar, how many civilians the Russian government killed in Chechnya? They declared an emergency situation, and it wasn't cops who were doing the fighting. It was the Spetsnaz, it was the military, it was the Interior Ministry troops.
Ariel Cohen tried to explain that the troops were engaged in compliance with all international covenants, but the debate has escalated to the higher tones. Ignoring the language of diplomacy, Cohen finally promised to shut up once he will be done, after being interrupted by the moderator, and asked the analytical expert Latipov not to make evil prophecies when the Russian expert described the consequences of US interference in countries' internal conflicts.
And it's important because public international law in today's environment is barely enforceable or non-enforceable. And I don't want to venture into a law school lecture, but we can use, and we're using, criminal justice domestically. The Western Europeans are doing it, the Russians are doing it, a lot of terrorists in Russia were brought.
Ваши ископаемые все равно достанут и продадут на мировом рынке.
Your natural resources would eventually be developed and sold on the world market. They're not going anywhere. They're concerned with having a transparent territory, so that they could kick the doors open and not have any obstacles in the form of laws and sovereignties. Soon they will deprive Kazakh parents of their own children based on the fact that the people in Kazakhstan don't provide a good upbringing for their kids. While the experts discussed the last Arab Spring in Astana, a new wave of protests hit Egypt. Clashes between supporters and opponents of the current president of Egypt, Mohamed Morsi, occurred in the heart of Cairo. Egyptians are calling for the fall of the regime, as well as a year ago when they sought the resignation of Hosni Mubarak. It is not clear what has provoked the discontent among Egyptians and how long will the protest actions continue. According to the Egyptian journalist Hisham Alam, after the fall of the Mubarak regime, people had hopes for future and great expectations of the new government.
It was a raise up by the Egyptian people for many different reasons. One of them is what happened with the last parliamentary elections and the happened by the ex-NDP National Democratic Party, ruled by Mubarak and his son.
The next topic of the media forum in Astana was the issue of Eurozone crisis and establishing of a customs union. The Russian experts immediately claimed that financial problems will lead to disintegration of the European Union. They accused the Europeans of being too romantic in accepting everyone in their union, including the countries which dragged down the Eurozone. They mostly talked about Greece, which consumed more money than it made. The Russian political expert Vitaly Tretyakov invited the European Union to join Russia as a way to resolve the situation. But the Europeans asked him not to exaggerate, as the EU train has slightly slowed down. However, it's still moving on rails, they concluded philosophically.
If, in case, which never would happen, but now I'm trying to be a visionary, or ask him to be a visionary, if Russia would join the European Union, would it then fall apart again? I mean, European Union will be stronger.
Вы уже не самые сильные, не самые давно, не самые богатые.
You're already not the strongest and not the richest. Moreover, soon you will become even poorer and less intelligent. It's not Russia that enters the European Union. It is indeed impossible. How can something large enter something small? Instead, we will unite. President is Russian, vice president is either French or German. Yet the Germans are more appealing to me lately. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to feed us, and we wouldn't feed you either. You're used to eating too much. In addition, the Russian experts advised not to repeat the mistakes of the European Union while establishing the customs union. Rustam Harifjanov, head of the Muslim TV channel, admitted that at first he was also enthusiastic about the request of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to join the customs union. However, looking at the situation in the Eurozone, he warns the trio, Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, against accepting new allies. We have serious doubts on whether we should do it. Wouldn't this have the same scenario as in the United Europe these days? We say these southerners spend too much money and don't work enough. Therefore, we need to reassure ourselves on how well they work and then define how much and whether they belong in our union at all. The issue of position and role of Kazakhstan in the customs union wasn't discussed on the media forum, although entrepreneurs of Kazakhstan are, in fact, against the union with Russia and Belarus. One of the main arguments is that unified customs rates will and have already caused the price hike on the domestic market. Nevertheless, the suspended issues of those criticizing the customs union weren't discussed on the Eurasian media forum.
Мы видим, что ни одна, скажем так, панель, которая заявлена, не связана с внутриполитическими ситуациями.
We see that none of the issues discussed are related to political events or social situation. None of the conflicts within the country were addressed either. Moreover, I don't see that authorities are looking for a way out of the situation. In fact, they seem to rather transfer their responsibility to foreign players, hoping that Russia will pull us through all problems.
Есть такая надежда на то, что Россия нас спасет от всех проблем.
Kazakh political expert Olgana Umbitalieva refused to attend the forum in Astana. She insists the forum is nothing but a pro-government platform with favorable speakers. Whereas the hostess of the forum, Dariga Nazarbayeva, referred to it as a unique platform for open discussions. According to her, everyone was able to express their opinion. We'd like to have this experience occur in other parts of the world where there is no deep understanding of how important this is. That's why we do what we do. The journalists often ask me about the use and the benefit of the media forums for Kazakhstan. Of course, it wouldn't pay for your food, nor it will increase your financial income. But the forum provides the communication opportunity and the eye-to-eye debates. At a concluding press conference, Dariga Nazarbayeva reproached the Kazakh journalists for being passive. According to her, there are practically no issues with the freedom of speech in Kazakhstan. Government favors the work of state and non-state media, while saying that the issue of freedom of speech in the country is very outdated. Next on Vlast KZ. Drivers of faith. Reactions to innocence of Muslims in Bishkek, waves of spontaneous disturbances and conspiring rumors. Unraised virgin lands. Ministry of Culture bans paintings from modern art exhibition in Astana. We will return to those topics in a few minutes.
Главные события в Казахстане. Достоверные факты. Эксклюзивные комментарии. Читайте в Казахстане информационно-аналитический портал «Республика». Чтобы обойти блокировки, воспользуйтесь доменом respublicas.info. Вы окажетесь на так называемом прокси-портале. Специально разработанные канадскими специалистами по интернет-технологиям, прокси-порталы помогают пользователям получать информацию в тех странах, где блокируют интернет-ресурсы. В Китае, Иране, в Казахстане. Вы принимаете условия использования системы и попадаете на страницу информационно-аналитического портала «Республика». Материалы интернет-портала также доступны пользователям всемирной сети Facebook. facebook.com/respublica.kaz. Если вы хотите поделиться информацией, вам есть что рассказать, звоните в редакцию «Республики». Наши телефоны в Казахстане +7 727 273 92 95, в Москве +7 495 621 87 03.
Новости Казахстана на казахском языке смотрите в 21:00 и далее каждый нечетный час. Новости Казахстана на русском языке в 22:00 и далее каждый четный час. Новости Казахстана на английском языке смотрите в 16:30, 17:30, 18:30 и 19:30 со вторника по субботу. Время Астаны. изготовление и размещение рекламы на канале К+.
Welcome back. Demonstrations of Atajurt party supporters were held in Kyrgyzstan, demanding a release of arrested opposition parliamentarians. The opposition's rally in support of nationalizing Kumtor ended in an attempt to storm the building where deputies of the parliament assemble. Its organizers, MPs Tashiyev, Zhaparov and Mamytov, were arrested immediately on charges of attempting to overthrow the government. Meanwhile, the mysterious and terrible story of defiled graves in the Christian cemetery in Bishkek saw its resolution. Suspicions were far-reaching. First in line were those with a vengeful attitudes towards the controversial and banned in several countries anti-Islamic video "Innocence of Muslims."
As you can see, these two monuments were not properly hastened and fell on the ground by the time we arrived at the scene. The graves were found in this condition by family members of the people buried inside who reported the incident to the police. Another woman brought a similar complaint to the station later the same day. Thus, the detectives were looking at the case of multiple desecrations of graves at the same cemetery. Local residents say it is done by Muslims or some other ethnic group. Victims link the incident with the reaction of the Muslim world to the controversial anti-Islamic film Innocence of Muslims, which insults Prophet Muhammad. Short YouTube videos of the film indirectly led to the murder of an American ambassador in Benghazi and a wave of serious protest across the Islamic world. The victims in Kyrgyzstan even say the desecration of a Christian cemetery is only logical at this point. It all seems like preparations for a new crusade. The protest against innocence of Muslims was held in late September, with the crowd led by local MP Tursunbay Bakiroglu to the American embassy. At a press conference, he said that thousands of people addressed him through Facebook, asking what they are waiting for and why nobody speaks up for them. Supposedly, if not for the MP's intervention, the rally at the embassy could have had a less peaceful outcome. It was hard for me to discourage people, especially when the outrage was so strong during the first days. Initially, people planned to protest at Gansi American Air Base. I talked them out of it and managed to cancel the rally on Friday, as I would not be able to control the crowd of thousands. The Friday prayer in Bishkek can potentially gather together up to 10,000 Muslims in each mosque. Therefore, it was decided to hold the protest on Wednesday, September 26. Prior to that, protesters submitted a petition to the embassy representatives, demanding to bring filmmakers and YouTube to justice. By this point, Kyrgyz parliament already signed a bill banning the film's distribution in the country, and the government approved it. Freedom House, an international human rights organization, immediately reflected on the matter. The video isn't directly responsible for an epidemic wave of hypocrisy in which political leaders with established records of self-serving persecution of the press and in some cases oppression of religious minorities are demanding an international regime of censorship that would supposedly protect universal religious values. Freedom House and other international organizations should not intervene in the internal affairs of the state. Expert Usubaliyev believes that the statement of the international organization was seen by many as another provocation similar to the one triggered by the controversial film itself. In his opinion, to a degree, this is a test of the religious fanaticism level of every Islamic state. On the one hand, we reacted well, staying in line with a civilized protest. We did not call for violence, etc., so that type of thing did not work in Kyrgyzstan. But perhaps they assumed that the degree of radicalism would be much higher in the country. At the end of the week, the police arrested the defilers of the Christian cemetery in Bishkek. All three, two fifth-graders and their 10-year-old friend, were not Muslims. What was almost taken as an inter-religious conflict turned out to be a childish prank. I climbed over it and it fell down, so we shook the others and they fell when we left. Hooligans' parents already restored grave sites and victims withdrew their claims. Unbeknown to the boys, in a way they did a favor to the state. The incident of vandalism caused a joint Muslim-Russian Orthodox conference. For the first time ever, senior religious officials discussed the tactics of joint resistance against provocations. We believe that this union of Christians and Muslims can help withstand provocations. This platform is open to all. Catholics, Jews, and others should certainly work together and serve as a model to others and society as a whole. That religious leaders will defend their common position on these matters. After all, we're talking about universal religious values.
A modern art exhibition titled Art Dala opened this week in Astana. Paintings, installations, graphics and performances were presented, although, as Radio Azatik reports, several works came under censorship. According to artists, the Ministry of Culture banned the display of paintings criticizing poverty and mediocrity in Kazakhstan. Riding the camel and covered in paint, the modern art represented by a group of artists, better known as Kızıl Traktor, has entered Astana. The exposition is held in the thousands of square meter large hall, which is poorly adapted for this kind of exposure. Nevertheless, the capital residents, unspoiled by galleries, were grateful even to have that. It's a well-sized exposition, I don't know, but somehow it brought up the sadness. The installation art by Ismail Bayaliyev called The Herd, which was in tune with Astana's propensity for gigantomania, attracted attention. Well, see those horses, if you pay attention to their ears, it means they gallop. When a horse is scared, the ears become pointy. The people here put much effort and decorated the premise. It leaves a good impression. Leaving a good impression and somehow a bit of sadness, the contemporary art is cautiously perceived by the government authorities. Some of the artworks didn't make it to the exposition due to the censorship. Fine art expert Nigora Akhmetova, director of Tashkent Biennale, says that Uzbekistan didn't have an exposition of such kind in a long time, yet it hasn't been previously organized in Kazakhstan at all. This gigantic perception of forms is purely Kazakh. It is very unusual for other nations. You can feel the large steppes of Kazakhstan through this artwork. It reveals the power, the wind. You just need to look carefully. Unlike the art experts, the residents of capital were attracted by the different kind of steppe. Improvised dirt with iron uniform suit inside, either of military or official nature. The fresh white spot dries under the fan on the floor. I don't understand why would someone spill the paint. Would it make more sense if I told you that the paint was supposed to be red? Yes, it would. Then I would have understood that it's about our battle actions, since red is a very alarming color. Do you think that an artist was requested to paint this spot white? Yes, it's quite possible. Well, the paint is easy to understand. I've painted it white on purpose to avoid extra questions. This paint spot is just an artistic gesture. I like these costumes myself. I'd like to expose these suits separately and spill some paint next to them as well. It's poorly exposed here and people don't get to observe the entire composition. People have become very modern lately. They want to hear sounds because the visual is no longer enough for them. The fact that fine art experts and regular visitors of Art Dala exhibition have different opinions means a lot. Driven by intuition, the viewer was attracted to the most comprehensive installation art, which revealed him an existing reality with no complicated metaphors. Moreover, the visitors had no chance to view certain images as some of them weren't displayed for censorship reasons. These toy-like dinosaurs are actually an illustration of the massacre at Arkan outpost with Private Chelak. However, the audience doesn't pay much attention to this piece, but this is the encryption of the incident. In fact, it's not the bloody massacre that is portrayed here, but the toy soldiers manipulated by someone. In this corner, you could see the encrypted data of the incident and the number of the victims. Unfortunately, it is rarely possible to provide the description next to the artwork to make it more comprehensible for the viewers. Of course, not everyone came to look for the meaning. Someone came to post it on their social network page, taking a few nice pictures, while others simply came to be seen at the social event. Do you think Astana is a city of modern art? I believe that Astana itself is a modern city, including the architecture, construction, and this exhibition is very relevant. I think we need to educate young people, we need to expose them to such things. The modern art exhibition in the city of high-ranked officials and large-scale kickbacks is already an artistic act by itself. According to goszakup.gov.kz, the exhibition had a price tag of about $226,000. The state order was executed by the foundation called the Spiritual Development of the People of Kazakhstan. The director of this foundation was strongly avoiding the publicity in the press. Let's not mention anything about me. You may cover this campaign, but leave me out of the picture. I'll give an interview both in Russian and in Kazakh. I'll give you whatever is needed to be publicized. Before all the guests even managed to leave, the janitor started cleaning up the paint spots left after the performance. This indeed was quite an artistic act. You were watching Vlast KZ on KPLUS channel, trends, highlights and personalities of the past week. Goodbye.